Well, welcome back to our Cloud Plus 2024 refresh. We're doing this because, hey, there's this new certification guide. The test was updated in 2024. So we've covered already pages 1, 2, and we're starting on 3. We just finished cloud architecture, so we're getting into deployment today. Let's go. So, cloud deployment. So, points that we're going to cover: compare and contrast cloud deployment models. Given a scenario, implement appropriate development strategies. Summarizing aspects of cloud migration. Given a scenario, use code to deploy and configure cloud resources. And given the set of requirements, provision appropriate cloud resources. So if you see that we're getting that right from right here, these bullet points right here. Okay, so compare and contrast cloud deployment models. This is interesting because there are a lot of different cloud deployment models. So public. This is what you think of when you hear Amazon Web Services, AWS, or Azure or Google Cloud. These are all cloud infrastructure that is shared. They're public. Private cloud. This is cloud infrastructure for a single entity. So you can run a cloud computing infrastructure locally. This means you're in charge of the hardware, the data center. You're in charge of the cloud. You may let a cloud provider manage parts of it, but you are really in charge of basically everything. A hybrid, where you use, let me take a step back with private cloud. There's actually open source software to do this. So let me open that really quick. Okay, so we have OpenStack here. By the way, these links will be all down below. Everything I share will be down below. So OpenStack is an open source cloud development or cloud software to be able to run stuff. So it's something you can do. With AWS, you can actually have Outpost where you run parts of AWS Cloud in your own data center. It's kind of cool, the type of things that you can do. Okay, so hybrid, you use private and usually multiple public cloud. For example, you might not want to be locked into a specific vendor like Amazon Web Services or Azure or Google. You want to be able to run on any of them so that you as a company can have the hand up in the negotiation if you want to try and negotiate prices. You'd have to be pretty big to negotiate price discounts with the cloud providers, but it's possible. And if you don't like it, you will just focus more on one versus the other. Or maybe there's some challenges in the world that causes it that you can't use one for a while. Because maybe they have stopped people from your country from being able to use them. So for whatever reason, you might want to be able to use multiple public clouds. Sometimes you might want to be able to burst to cloud. You run everything locally, but if you have unexpected load, you burst into the cloud. Maybe there's different classifications of data, and you'll have some sensitive stuff local, but things that are not as sensitive you can put in the public cloud. So hybrid is all about flexibility. There's a community cloud. A community cloud is where multiple organizations work together to create a cloud infrastructure. This is shared with a community. So sharing of resources for the greater benefit of those in your community is awesome. I have seen public cloud providers, though, eating away at this because they are offering really good incentives to not-for-profits and governments type things. And they are meeting the special needs of some of those organizations. Okay, cloud within the cloud. You can run your own cloud in a public cloud infrastructure. So you do not manage the data center. CompTIA refers to this as cloud in a cloud. So multi-cloud. focuses on using services from different cloud vendors. So I kind of think of containers a little bit when I think about multi-cloud. Um, so you lose much of the benefits of cloud by using containers, but you have a lot of benefits as well. So it just depends on what you want. So and poly-cloud would be the opposite of this. Multi-tenancy. This is where multiple customers are using the same hardware. So that way you get cost savings with some added risks. This is good because my peaks might not be your peak cost. So we can split that cost for the peaks. But there are vulnerabilities that could potentially lead to some data leaking from one of the tenants to the others. Those are frequently handled and patched, but there's always the unknowns, right? So great resources for this would be the Wikipedia page on cloud computing. So it should go through basically everything we've talked about and much more. Yeah. So I'll link to this down below. Okay. So given a scenario, implement appropriate deployment strategies. So this is where you need to be thinking about what is the scenario. Are we worried about cost? Are we worried about control? Are we worried about features? Are we worried about policy? You have to think about the scenario to implement the appropriate strategy. So why is it that we want to do private cloud or hybrid cloud or public cloud? And which one meets our needs? Summarize the aspects of cloud migration. So you need to be able to plan and assess what you have. So if you don't need something, why do you have it around? Is it the application compatible with what you have? This is something that business people often don't even think about. They just say, hey, there's this application, I really want to use it. And so they buy it, and hey, it doesn't work with our single sign-on, our way of logging in. So now do we have to have different login just for this one thing? Or maybe it is using a new database that we've never heard of and never had to use. And so now we have a lot of time and effort that's having to go in to understanding the system because it uses technology we're not familiar with as a company. So you have to think about compatibility of your application with your organization, not just with does it accomplish what you want it to do. So is there some dependencies between application components, datas, and services that need to be thought about as you plan and assess these things? So this is all about the strategies. So when we are going to migrate to the cloud, how do we want to do it? Do we want to just take what we're working on and move it as is? That with minimal change, and that's great because there's cost to change, but there's also the cost to operate. And so if we're thinking about the total cost of ownership, when you're migrating, it's a great time to rethink how you're doing things. You can lift and shift is when you're just moving stuff, but is that the right way of doing it? This might be a great time to think about, hey, what should we be doing as a company? What should we focus on? And maybe we need to, so a lot of places that I've worked at, we've had what we would refer to as a pecking order. Here's our preference of what we will support. And that's so that we can focus and get really, really, really good on certain things. And we tell people, hey, use that where possible. If you start to go outside this realm, we might not be able to support you well. So refactoring, maybe you have to take, maybe you want to take something and you're just using a small piece of it. And maybe instead of migrating that to the cloud as is, you completely redo it. And maybe this is a great time. Maybe it'll save you time, effort, and even money by switching it to something that's cloud native. Um, Maybe you even want to take this time to ditch some old products that just aren't working well for your company. And you can um, make your cloud migration strategy more complex. Um, you have to really consider your options here. But some things might not be cloud friendly. So maybe the licensing by moving it to the cloud is just absurd. And so maybe you are forced to purchase something else. Or maybe you ask yourself, do we really even need to do this? Is this something that was a good idea at one point in time, but maybe that time is past? Maybe we should just get rid of it. Do we actually need to keep this? And then the other thing is when you're thinking about cloud migration, is this something that you need to keep on premise, or is this something you're willing to put in the public cloud? So when you start to get to executing your migration, how are you going to transfer the data to the cloud securely and efficiency? This is where AWS really excels because they have the ability to transfer petabytes by using their snowplow, right? It's a big old semi truck they'll bring to your site and get your data out really quick and then drive it to their location. They have snowballs that actually have the ability. It's almost like a mobile cloud in some ways because there's some functionality of cloud computing you can do. But you could take it with you like to the Arctic and has lots of storage and then bring it back and sync it up. But so how are you going to execute it? How are you going to get your data there? How are you going to move your applications there? What about your infrastructure? If you're moving to the cloud, how are you going to get rid of your infrastructure you're not using anymore? So oftentimes companies, when they decide to go really into the cloud, they start to set goals to shut things down so they can start to see the cost savings of not running stuff locally. Because for a short point in time, you're kind of getting dual cost as you're moving, and this happens even with upgrading applications. When I would upgrade applications, we would have the production running and the upgrade production thing. When I say production, this might be 20 something systems to support that production environment because we had prod copy, which was a way to check to make sure you knew what you were doing. There was prod stage, which was the next version of prod, so it's where where upgrades, the customizations in-house were, dev, demo, all these environments, and all of them had multiple parts. And when you're doing an upgrade, you had to double that. Well, when you're migrating to the cloud, you have to do it in a way that you're not doubling for a while and having all that cost. And that's the cool thing about the cloud. You can actually go slowly and migrate small things at a time. But when you're thinking about everything, there are some things that you're going to have to duplicate for a while. It's just going to, for example, authentication type things. It would be really good to have those migrating and syncing data from your private cloud or on-prem and public cloud. Okay, so security and compliance. We need to be able to make sure things are transferred securely, set up securely, that it's complying with all of the different regulations and internal policies that you have. And then optimizing. So one of the cool things about the cloud is public cloud, you only pay for what you use. So by doing that, you don't have to pay for all this extra overhead that you have in the past had locally to manage your peaks. So because of that, you're able to um, save money if you do it right and well. And I say save money, and I've got to be careful there, because you're switching some of the fixed costs. And so it doesn't often look like you're saving money, but if done right, some people will be able to save money. Um, Done right, some people will not necessarily save money, but they'll realize they weren't doing a lot of things that they should have done, and those will now be done for them. Unfortunately, too often we don't do it right. Um, Monitoring and management, continuously monitoring so you can improve things, understand when things are not going well versus when they are, and managing your cloud appropriately. Okay. So, one of the great things that we get with cloud computing, both private cloud and public cloud, is the ability to run infrastructure as code. So this is the way that you can actually manage and the provisioning of new systems using basically a script. It's a machine readable, usually JSON, rather than through physical hardware. This helps to reduce errors, right? Because you create it and you can stamp it out. Not only that, you can create it so that you can give it to a lot of different people. So it also allows for version control. So automation of re-rolling things out and having versions of the infrastructure. So some of the common tools we see would be AWS CloudFormation. So that's Amazon's version of infrastructure as code. Terraform works with multiple cloud vendors, AWS, Azure, Google. Azure has their own. It's Azure Resource Manager, or ARM templates. So I would strongly suggest, in fact, this is the note down below, you should review sample codes and know how to read them and try and identify if it's a Terraform or an AWS CloudFormation or Azure. That would be the minimum that I would encourage you to understand in this area, because we like to see if people can read computer speak. Anyway, basic concepts and syntax. So how to use variables, how you build the resources in the infrastructure as code, and how do you reuse components, right? Deployment scenario. Are you doing a single resource deployment, or is it a multi-tiered application? So something that requires like a database, an app server, a web server, load balancers, and all that stuff. So configuration management, understanding what your current configuration is, keeping track of changes to it, and making sure it has not deviated from there, as well as having a version control. Okay, so and remember, review sample code in this area. I'm not going to do it as part of this. Maybe I'll do it in another video and add it to this later, but I'm not planning on reviewing the sample code at this point in time. Okay, so given a set of requirements, provision the appropriate cloud resources. So once again, you're going into requirements. What are the requirements? What does the business need? What do they care about? Cost, time, policy, how to provision. So kind of covered a lot of the different things there. What do you need to provision? Does it need to scale? Is it compute resources? Is it storage? Is it networking? Does it need a database? What type of database do you use in your company? How do you support it? Do you know how to operate the databases? Is that type of database supported by the application? So the cost. What are some challenges with the cost? Do you want to have some really cool security filtering in place? And if so, are you willing to pay for it? What are the security measures that are in place to keep it safe? And how are you monitoring it? How are you going to improve it? Um, okay, so let's think about what are some items that will help us better answer questions in this area that we haven't yet covered. So when you're migrating to the cloud, you might have a physical machine that you want to move there. So are you going to convert it to a virtual machine? Are you going to convert it to something else? Um, do you have virtual machines? Are you converting it from virtual machine to virtual machine? So P to V, V to V. Or are you going to migrate it to something else? Cloud to cloud migrations. Do you care about vendor lock-in? If you don't, then maybe you're going to go all in on as much, as deep in the as a service model as possible. But if you do care about vendor lock-in, maybe you're going to stick with containers so that you can easily migrate between cloud providers. Do you want to do something like platform as a service or all the way up to software as a service? What are the types of controls that you need to be in place? Do they have the ability for you to tweak proper firewalls and limit access the way that you would like? Storage and database. Does it have the right type of storage that you need for your project? The block, file, or object storage, which one's correct? Does it have the proper bandwidth? Is it fast enough? With database migrations, are you going to migrate all your databases as is to the cloud? Or maybe you have, so right now you have Oracle, MySQL, MS SQL, Postgre. Maybe you want to try and get as many of them only to one. So maybe you decide to go with one of those as top. Let's say, for example, MySQL. You're going to say is your preferred database. So any system that can use MySQL as part of the migration to the cloud, maybe you migrate it from Oracle and Microsoft SQL or Postgre to MySQL if it's supported. And there are tools to do that. Especially Amazon has some wonderful tools that I've seen. So are these all relational databases? If you're going to completely switch out a system, do you want to go to a non-relational? Does it make sense? There are lots of things to think about when thinking about migrating to the cloud. I hope this will help you. Maybe in migrating to cloud, also for the test. And we'll see you in the next video.